Let's dive right in, my friend. I always like to start by asking people about their experiences with education because you made education, whether teaching or working in administrative roles, it's been your career for decades. So, did you have a great experience in education when you were a kid? Were you one of those kids who like really liked school, or were you happy to get out of there?
No, I really liked school. Um, you know, for the most part, at school, I had a great experience. I came from a small town, started in kindergarten with a bunch of people. Some others joined us in grade 7, some others in grade 9, and we all graduated together for the most part in grade 13. So,
Small
small
group.
school, small
Mm,
town,
mm.
sports, school, parties. It's all good.
It's kind of like
Yeah.
what you see in the movies. Do you feel like that's the kind of schooling your kids got?
Well, I grew up in a small town, right? My kids have grown up in Guelph, which is not a big city by any stretch, but it's not the small 2,000 person town that I grew up in. But my kids, I think, and they range from the oldest is 25 and the youngest just turned 13. So they've, I think they've had a really good experience in school. They've had great teachers. Um, they've played sports. They've got lots of friends. One of the differences that my kids have experienced to their benefit that I didn't was a really diverse population of people in terms of ethnicity, socioeconomic status, newcomers to Canada. My kids had that benefit that I didn't. Growing up, again, small town, Southern Ontario. And I think that that's really done to them a real advantage. They've gone out into the world, which is, which is a diverse world that we live in now, thankfully. And it's just second nature for my kids. When I graduated high school and went off to University of Waterloo, it was, admittedly a little bit of probably culture shock, but it was great. You know, the roommates that I had were of all different nationalities, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, I remember one of the culture shocks I had. I grew up in Vancouver, and so there was a diversity ethnically. I went to a private school though, so while there was socioeconomic diversity, it was within a range. And the biggest difference I noticed when I left was this cocoon I was in terms of having so much support and people to help you do all these things. And then all of a sudden I'm living in Montreal, going to McGill University at 18, and you have to pay your bills. You have to, you're going grocery shopping by yourself for the first time. And I know you and I have had discussions in the past about financial literacy, for example, and how that is an area of education that we needed when we were in school in different generations, but now more than ever, potentially with the different ways of gig economy and online financial advising, things that students growing up in now and going through high school now need all the more. Do you see that deficit in your kids' education as well? The older ones in particular?
Yeah. I was very pointed with my kids, all three of them, about trying to give them that kind of education, that kind of background, to give them a little bit of a leg up from that perspective, and because finances can be, personal finances, even just personal finances, can be math centric. Tried to make it so that it was more accessible. Two of my kids are very they're like me, they're kind of STEM oriented. And the other one isn't so much. So what I actually did when I was on my first sabbatical, I started writing a bunch of what I told them were just blog posts about finances, and that maybe younger people would appreciate them. And it's kind of a learning opportunity, but really it was a bit of a Trojan horse because I'd write them and I'd get my two older kids to proofread them for me.
Nice.
To read them and think about them. So I did that for probably about a year or so, and it was, I think it was effective. So,
No,
yeah.
and I find that that is usually when it comes to that area or gaps in different elements, even if you're talking about in different places or spaces, arts programs that are not being funded or STEM experimentations that aren't getting funded in certain schools, although that is increasing now, or this type of financial literacy, these gaps are often filled at home by people who are, I was brought up by OCD German and South Asian father. I knew where money came from, and I had to balance my $10 allowance and provide receipts. So, but when we think of innovation and education, because this is your niche area, both in your field of health and biometric research, but also in administration and educational administration. When we think about innovation, people tend to think of it as technology, but I always think too of this content and curricular innovation and how are the world, what we need to know, or the skills we need to have are changing, and that's innovative in terms of how we're organizing what we teach and how we teach. Don't even get me started on how we define and measure success, right? But now, I mean, we do have this technological lens. I do know that's an important part of innovation for you. But how are you now looking at innovation and education? When I am drilling you down to the microcosm of the classroom, let's start there and then we'll zoom out. What does it mean to you to have innovative teaching and learning environments these days?
Well, I think we'd all agree that you need to meet the students where the students are, physically, literally physically where they are, and in terms of their education, what they need, but also what they want, in terms of how they're engaged by their instructors, by their teachers, by their professors. And then we spend a lot of time thinking about that, the student experience and what the students need and what the students want. But we also need to give a lot of deep thought to what the professors need and want, what the teachers need and want. And there's not often enough thought, in my mind, given to that piece. So, teaching and learning happen at the intersection of the professor and the student, right? And whether that's face to face in a classroom or a large lecture hall, or whether it's online, like we're doing right now through Zoom or some other medium, it's important that both parties, the students, the professors or teachers, are working together in a space that lets them communicate with one another clearly, to attempt to understand one another clearly. And I don't think enough attention has been paid to that over the years, especially in the higher ed sector. Probably, I'm not a school teacher, so my wife is a school teacher and a high school, and so by proxy, I suppose, I guess I've learned that maybe the same concerns are there,
Yeah.
in the high school and primary schools as well. So the innovation it ends up being a process, I think, of how to discover the best way, the optimal way. And the word optimal is a tough one to use because it intrinsically implies a point in time. But the optimal way might be changing over time. And so we've seen that through the pandemic and since, that the way our instructors and our students can interact with one another is evolving. So what does optimal mean at
Mm.
that point? We talk about things like blended, and unfortunately, the word blended gets misconstrued in various different ways. Um, Oftentimes, the way it gets used in conversation isn't consistent with the evidence based,
Mm.
pedagogically appropriate determination of the word. And I mean, from your PhD thesis
Mm.
so many years ago, that was clear that the blended has a particular meaning.
Mm.
But then, we go through it. Now we're talking about words like high flex and trying to create opportunities for students to have their education be really accessible, like in almost any time of day, anywhere in the world, that they can engage with their education. And I mean, that's awesome. But you're not going to have professors being available 24 hours a day from
Trying
anywhere in
to,
the
yeah.
world,
How do you
right?
square the circle? And it's see,
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
two. I want to pull on both the student and the instructor thread here because um let's do the student one first because that's the last one you were talking about. But this idea of flexibility, and I'm currently a disclaimer to those on listening is I'm currently writing up a research report on high flex modalities. So this is at the top of mind for me right now. Flexibility. Okay, so that's this idea of accessing course material. So this idea of engagement being at the center of innovation for you. How we're engaging that teaching and learning contract and relationship between teaching and learning, teachers and instructors and students, and the research, the literature review and the research of the study concurs that students like the flexibility, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best for learning. When you think of learning, and again, this idea of optimal or best, or what do we mean by learning?
I gotta interrupt you for a second because you just said like it doesn't mean it's the best for learning. Well, you're the first one to tell me like what does that even mean?
I don't know. I don't know.
How do we measure learning from
Yes.
that?
And so if you're just looking at grades, or you're just looking right now, they're looking at engagement, satisfaction, student engagement. Again, engagement, double click on that. And how are you measuring that? And then achievement outcomes being performance in the course. But I find we've done research studies and talked about research about technology enhanced teaching and learning environments for almost a decade. And what we have found in our reports consistently is that students want more flexibility and accessible learning options, but they don't necessarily know what to do with all that freedom. And imagine, a child and a student listening, like the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex does not finish developing till 26, around 26 years old. Well, so when we think of students, flexibility, access, make decisions about what is best for you. Do you want to attend online this week? Do you want to attend in person this week? What do we need to do to better support students in making those types of decisions, which are complex decisions and are not just like, we're assuming sometimes that students are going to be able to do this intuitively?
Well, we're at the beginning of the period of time that we can even talk about this because we can provide the flexibility for students to engage anytime from anywhere on almost any device if they're not in a lecture hall. So we're just at the beginning of this. I mean, I think we need to have these conversations. We need people like you asking these questions, people in positions like mine before I transition out of this job and back to, teaching myself in the classroom and my research lab, people in positions like mine trying to answer those questions. But we need to, first of all, I think we need to give ourselves time and space. The answers to expect that this relatively new way of teaching and relatively new opportunities for students to engage in their learning after like almost 1,000 years, like literally 1,000 years of doing it in a particular way.
Yeah.
I think we need to give ourselves time and space to figure this out, to try
Yeah.
new and different ways of engaging. I mean, the technology's there now, and you and I spend an awful lot of time talking about the intersection of teaching and learning and technology and entangled pedagogy. I mean, just letting go of the notion that we need to consider either the technology or the pedagogy as preeminent in the discussion we're just beginning to get to the point where we don't have to make that distinction in our own minds, that they're entangled.
Yeah, it's so true. You're talking about, like, it's funny because your voice of wisdom is going to be in my ear forever, because this idea of grounding me in the fact that these things feel innate to us. Like, to me, when I consider these topics, like, I have a hard time with structural change taking so long, because it just makes sense. And it's like, let's figure this out. Let's the speed of innovation. So innovating. So we've talked, this idea of the student and these innovative environments, but supporting students in that environment. Well, we don't have it figured out yet. Yes, they do need supports that don't currently exist, or they need us to integrate supports, but we need to.
And so do the teachers. The teachers need them.
Yes. And I'm going to get to that one too, because I think that pulls on a lot of structural elements too. But this idea of being uncomfortable, Will, and like stewing in the discomfort of, these are big questions, like systemic questions. But the point is, we're moving in that, right? We're asking good questions, and those questions can iterate based on, the theory from Tim Fons of entangled pedagogy is a year and a half old. So as these things evolve and enter into, our epistemology, the questions will evolve, and we'll just kind of sit in the quagmire that is institutional change. How do you do that? Well, how do you personally persevere in this space, knowing it can take long and it is uncomfortable?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It involves a whole bunch of different ways of thinking. My friend David Phipps said to me a long time ago, there's no such thing as an academic emergency. And I like that. I like that phrase. I mean, sometimes there are emergencies within the academy.
Sure.
That doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as an academic emergency. The academy moves slowly. It's an institution in and of itself, that it's got its, the academic culture is unique. The academy moves slow, and that's okay. I mean, institutions move slowly. I often have to, the piece of advice that I offer to people is, like, the academy is trying to make change in an institution is like moving through a viscous fluid, like oil. The harder you push on it, the harder it pushes back. But if you're slow and gentle and persistent, you can make progress. That's the analogy I keep in my mind. The other, when we're talking about innovation in the academy, we're also talking about, like, making change, guiding change. But change is scary. And for our teachers, for our faculty members who have been doing things in a certain way for a long, long time, their whole career perhaps, asking them to do something differently, at scale, is a real challenge.
Mm-hmm.
A real challenge to the extent that you can start to bump into collective agreement issues between the employer and the teacher, or the association that represents the faculty member. And that's why we end up talking with champions for different approaches. We go out and we find the people who want to try something novel, but probably most importantly, we listen to the community that wants to be innovative, and then create space for that innovation. space for those people to come forward. And like at York University, that space was created by our now president, Rhonda Lenton, when she served, I think, as vice provost academic before becoming provost, to create the Academic Innovation Fund. So that was prescient years ago. And York has allocated in the ballpark of about $17 million to support academic innovation over the years. And so that's a function of just creating space for people to come forward with their ideas, and then helping them to explore those ideas, to bring those ideas to fruition in terms of perhaps an institutional change in the way we do things, or a different way of thinking about how you might offer a course, how you might engage students, and then trying to institutionalize those changes to make them available to others across the institution, but by first showing and celebrating the success. And also, this is part of the thing when I say when we need to give ourselves space and time. Success in research doesn't always mean, a p-value of less than 0.05. It can mean that you figured out something that doesn't work that you thought was going to work, and that can take you down a different road, a different pathway to something that ends up working, but is different from where you started. And we've seen that with academic innovation. So we're creating space structurally within the institution. And then just reminding people that it's not a rush. It's, we need to be persistent. We need to be consistent, patient, and something that maybe in higher ed sometimes gets lost is also kindness. Need to be kind to one another and to our students, because we're all struggling through these changes. So if we try to come back to meet our students where they are, help our faculty by meeting our faculty where they are, and then trying to understand where the two of them intersect with one another and meet them there, create space for that. And the kinds of innovations that come forward are, there can be curricular innovations, but a couple of things that come to my mind are more kind of student experience innovations, like Why You Start at York, which is co-curricular, but kind of, I don't know, I'll go out on a limb and say kind of semi-curricular too. Like it's not just co-curricular, but it's helping students to understand higher education, understand York University, understand what maybe the next step that they're taking has in store for them. And that came out of academic innovation. That was a funded project.
That's a student preparedness tool, right? In terms of helping students feel more prepared in these innovative change management circumstances. No, this is great. And I want to pull on two threads now. Words. One you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned the other one, but this idea of scale and sustainability as we move forward. That's just part one of this exciting conversation, my friends. Click on part two and continue with us on this important journey we like to call the education revolution.